Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority's InNoVAtion Lunch and Learn series. I'm so glad that you were able to be here today, and thank you for taking the time to join us. My name is Mackenzie Love. I am the lead for NVTA's Transportation Technology Committee, and I'll be your host and moderator for today. This series was designed to create opportunities for pragmatic information exchange about technologies that are feasible either immediately or in the near future, say 1 to 5 years. And each session will focus on a topic that is supported by our Transportation Technology Strategic Plan, or TTSP. The TTSP itself was designed to proactively prepare for emerging technologies by maximizing benefits and minimizing any potential negatives of innovation. The 8 strategies and action plan that initially comprised this plan were adopted by the authority in May of 2021, and the first substantive updates were approved in November of 2022. This included the expansion of 2 strategies that were existing and the addition of 1 new strategy. Several of these are relevant to the topic of today's Lunch and Learn, which will explore best practices for connectivity and automation. Most notably of these is strategy number 4, which is currently being updated. Its new title will be Enhance Operations of the Multimodal Transportation System through Connectivity and Automation. But before we get into that, which I know is why you're here this morning, I have just a few housekeeping notes to share with you. First is that we ask you to please keep your mic muted during the presentation, but we will offer an opportunity to ask questions verbally later. In the meantime, we invite you to put questions in the chat box throughout the event. I will be reading those and sharing them with our speaker when we come to the question and answer session after the presentation. Finally, if you experience any technical difficulties, please put those in the chat box as well, and my colleague Ian Newman will be able to assist you with anything that may arise. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our speaker for today. We have Brad Stertz, who is Director of Government Affairs for Audi, and co-founder and chairman of Partners for Automated Vehicle Education, which is known as PAVE. And he is also a member of NVTA's Transportation Technology Committee. We're very grateful for his insights. And with that, I will pass it over to you, Brad.
Thanks, Mackenzie, and hello, everybody. It's good to see some friends and familiar names and faces. So glad we can catch up like this. Some of you may remember I gave some remarks earlier this year around connectivity and automation. I thought I could provide some updates and some new insights. Some things have happened since then, and thought it would be a good opportunity to look further at how Northern Virginia could be a real leader in this area. I think there's been some things that have happened, but being in the backyard of the federal government helps a lot, but also with the traffic challenges and solutions that NVTA is helping to address, I think there's a good opportunity. I hope my audio and video turns out okay, because I'm joining you from suburban Chicago, where I'm visiting our sister company, Navistar. And we're doing some interesting things together, as they're the #1 school bus manufacturer in the country. So there's a big opportunity with that. But as Mackenzie said, I'm the Director of Government Affairs for Audi, and I'm also the chair of the 5G Automotive Association, which is a global organization that looks to open deployment pathways for CV2X, cellular vehicle to everything. And I'll talk a lot about that. And also through my leadership and founding of Partners for AV Education, really have kept a close tabs, not only in my day job, but on this side effort on what's going on with automation. So the first thing I'll talk about, as this slide shows, is what is the outlook for AVs. As you see on the right here, you know, the self-driving shuttle that was operating in Merrifield is going to suspend operations, I guess. And I think there was quite a bit of learnings from that, and also learnings that we're seeing in other cities around the country. We, including myself, felt very excited about where automation was going to lead, and it's turned out that that's taken a bit longer than most of us projected. I don't think there's any need to be pessimistic about what could be happening with automated vehicles in the long term, but they're just not arriving as quickly as we all had hoped. And one of the first things that really boils down to is um, we're all kind of learning that it's great to do pilots. It's great to maybe transport people from a metro line to a entertainment district or a shopping district or something like that. But in the end, to make this really sustainable and scale up, we have to figure out and refine and build out the business models, because what automated vehicles are really competing against are pretty low cost other modes of transportation that can be found with anybody who's got a car and wants to use it for Uber rides or Lyft rides for short times in their day. So you've got these very expensive shuttles or vehicles that are competing with that, and we have to figure out how the business model actually adds up to scale this up in a significant way. Pilots are good so that people can get used to what automated vehicle technology is about, but in the end, you have to make this a business model. And the other thing, we really need to, going along with that, is thinking what are the pain points that consumers really need to have automated vehicles solve. So there's a lot of challenges that people want to not have to worry about the tedious parts of driving. And there's difficulties when you use mass transit of getting from your first mile to your last mile from more of the fixed routes and the fixed forms of transportation. We need to work, especially with local communities around that, and understand, because they're all different. Some communities in this country want to provide better transportation for seniors who have difficulty still driving. Some have, challenges in less affluent communities that have really difficulty using mass transit, getting to work or school or groceries or things of that nature. So it's something that really needs to be looked at in a sort of comprehensive way that maybe just a pilot can't do alone. You can show what's possible with a pilot, but in the long term of figuring out how do you solve the consumer, the transit users' needs is the end result. And the other thing I want to emphasize, and this has come up a lot, we, at least in Volkswagen Group, and I have colleagues who are working on an automated driving mobility as a service and transport as a service team that are looking at the opportunities in the US. We absolutely do not see self-driving vehicles as a competitor to transit. It's more of an enhancement to make that better and maybe a bit more efficient, where you don't need these sort of lumbering buses taking people to their or close to their homes. You can get people a bit more door to door. So that's the kind of things that they're still being looked at. The other part three, as you see on the slide here, is it's when we started out on this journey, and we meaning all of those who are really interested in self-driving and what it potentially could offer. There's now a very clear distinction between those mobility as a service, transport as a service fleets, which is more like what was operating in Merrifield, and the type of automated technology that you would see in a car you would put in your driveway or garage. And those require very different development processes because the human involvement and the ability of a fleet to be constantly maintained and brought in if one of the sensors isn't quite right, for example, or something needs to be fine-tuned in a vehicle. You can do that much more easily in a fleet than you can in a car that any of us could own. And that also requires different infrastructure needs too. So it's, again, we need to look at exactly the kind of use case that we're talking about for the future of automated vehicles in Northern Virginia in particular. And as I mentioned, progress is happening. There's a lot that can be done now that wasn't possible even a couple of years ago. It's just not happening as fast as we all expected it to happen. And I'll give you an anecdote. I was at a conference in Arizona, and they were giving away free rides on the Waymo car, and they were operating in downtown Phoenix. one of the one of the leaders of this organization that I was attending got in for the ride. The Waymo took off beautifully, but then a couple of skateboarders decided they were going to hold on to the back of the car. And they went for a little bit of a joyride in the back of the Waymo. And fortunately, the Waymo, did exactly what it was supposed to do. It pulled over, it realized this wasn't good, pulled over, came to a stop. But unfortunately, the guy was stuck in the car and they couldn't get it to resume its journey again. So they had to come out and fix it. And so, there's a lot of these development things that we have to all individually and together work through, and how this is going to look and feel. But I'm very confident it will happen. And the final point I wanted to make is that these are still very expensive vehicles, and they're all very expensive one-offs. And if you've ever seen some of these around, you'll notice how many LiDAR sensors, cameras, they're just all over the vehicle. So that adds a ton of cost to the car. They're extremely expensive. It's one of our executives in Germany joked it's like giving rides in a top-end Bentley. So that'll give you kind of a scale for it. But the other factor is public education remains low, and that's what we try to address with PAVE, is that you have to have people understand when the vehicle is truly capable of self-driving and when there's still responsibility for the person sitting in the driver's seat. That's a critical difference, and that's something that is really being looked at closely at NHTSA. As some of these level 2, level 3 vehicles are starting to proliferate now on the roads. We need to do a better job of helping the motorist understand when they still have responsibilities. So just to summarize on automated vehicles, I would, make sure that in Northern Virginia, we think about scalability over demos or limited scope ideas. Again, those are good for initially bringing people to experience what can happen, but over time, we need this to be a functioning business model. I think it's essential for Northern Virginia to work with the entire region on this, because you're gonna need that for success of the business model, to get as many people through these vehicles as possible, and to connect with the transit options in this district, in this region, and really continue to work with AV developers on some of the things that local authorities and local governments can do, along with VDOT, to prepare the roadways and other infrastructure, curb access, things like that. Is some of that's been going on, and I think we need to continue to work on how that's really going to look to make this successful longer term. And again, let's identify what are the exact solutions that automated driving technology can provide to the challenges that we face in Northern Virginia. So bringing that into greater clarity, I think, will help make this transition even more successful over time. Mackenzie, if you go to the next slide. You may have remembered when I spoke earlier this year, I put a lot of emphasis on V2X, and I'm not a big fan of alphabet soup, but that's kind of what we're left with, is the V's and the X's. And just explain what this is. To me, this is the most immediate opportunity that we can all develop, and we're right on the cusp of being able to see this take root and flourish. So of course, V is the vehicle and X is everything. And one of the things that's held back this topic over the years has been much more focus on the vehicle-to-vehicle communications, and this sort of elaborate ballet of cooperative maneuvering on the highways, all of which is good and all of which will come at some point. But when you think that there's roughly 285 million vehicles on America's roads, it's going to take a long time before a significant number of vehicles can communicate with each other to do this sort of cooperative maneuvering and improve throughput of traffic in that way. So what we've done at Audi, and we've worked with a number of partners and a number of communities around the country, and I'm desperate to do this more in Northern Virginia, is that we have put a lot of emphasis on things like vulnerable road users and vehicle to infrastructure communications. So being able to have CV2X equipped traffic signals or other street signals is crucial, but also we want to have communications with school buses, work zones, as we did with VDOT in the test bed in Northern Virginia, other public vehicles, transit buses, bicycles, as you see here on this picture, and around school zones to help protect the safety of children. There's a number of use cases where we can use this technology to do a better job in the areas where we're seeing fatalities nationwide really continue to climb at an alarming rate. And if you think about it, the safety of passengers inside the car has greatly improved, while those around the car and around traffic, it's deteriorated. So we need to keep our focus on how do we do a better job of that, ranging from cyclists to pedestrians to school kids to public workers, things like that. But what's needed to get to that point? We as automakers are still beholden to product development times, and we can't really develop a product until we know what the rules of the game are. As a result, the Federal Communications Commission said CV2X is the path we're going to go down for traffic communications. We said that's great. That was what Audi was really excited about doing globally, but they haven't completed their work in almost 2.5 years now. So we need the Federal Communications to continue to finalize the rules of the game so that we can have confidence that the car that we're designing won't be obsolete a year before it's ready to come out, because the rules weren't what we were expecting. We need to keep a very clear picture on solutions. There's one of the great things about CV2X is you can have direct communications with a vulnerable road user or infrastructure, or you can have mobile network where it goes up to a cell tower and back into the car, and vice versa. But we need to be very clear about these mobile network solutions that, in my opinion, are safety enhancing. They give the driver much more time to prepare for the fact that they're entering a dangerous situation, versus safety critical, where you've got literally microseconds to respond or you're going to hit somebody that you don't see. And that's the real benefit here of CV2X, is it's another layer of sensing technology that allows you to avoid a collision simply because you couldn't see a car or a cyclist or an ambulance coming around a corner, or a twisty road, school bus too, for that matter. And I'm continually perplexed with the fact that we in the industry and others around the industry have developed connectivity in one track and automation in another track, automated technology, self-driving. Ultimately, these two things have to combine and come together, because they're only going to help each other advance quicker, and we need to think of it in those terms. So they're not two separate things, they really do belong together. And I would say here that Northern Virginia is in a terrific position, not only because we at Audi and Volkswagen Group call it our home for our corporate headquarters, but you have and we at Audi received an FCC waiver to deploy in advance of the rulemaking that will be probably coming out early next year. But also with VDOT as one of the first two states to also apply for an FCC waiver and get it, there's now the opportunity to really fine-tune and explore how this could work effectively in our communities and with our transportation networks here in Northern Virginia. And we really should start thinking about how to do that. One of my great fears right now, which is something that I've shared with a lot of our partners in the industry and in the public sector, is the worst thing that could happen is the FCC will look at the fact that they offered waivers to us at the end of April. They're going to say, well, you guys were screaming that this was essential to cut down on fatalities, and now nothing's happened yet again, and they're going to pull the spectrum. if we don't take advantage of this door opening up for us. So we're excited. We at Audi, we're starting to work on MOUs with different cities and communities, simply to advise each other about what we need and to really chart the path forward in this ecosystem. It's it's going to take some thinking through what the options are, but we're happy to begin to help with that process at Audi. And even today, the city of Peachtree Corners near Atlanta will announce that we signed an MOU with them to do this, and we look forward to doing this kind of thing with Northern Virginia and its counties and cities as well. Um, one of the things that I think we could focus on here is really identifying the highest priority intersections for upgrades. I recently did a report for ITS America with Blaine Leonard of Utah DOT, and he estimated that a relatively reasonable build out of equipping 75% of the nation's busiest intersections over 10 years, and the cost of that would be, in total for the whole nation, $6.5 billion. And that's a lot of money, but in the scheme of things, with the infrastructure funding that we've just seen, and maybe a need to revisit that as this begins to unfold as a reality, we can think about how to deploy at the most important intersections in Northern Virginia and the counties that we count among the authority members. And pardon me, the other thing that I think is really very important and we should think about is something that our counterparts at the Federal Highway Administration are considering. And there's been a lot of discussion around the way to unlock this is to equip public fleets. So everything from school buses to transit buses to vehicles that cities and counties operate for their personnel to postal vehicles, theoretically, could all be equipped with this. And what that does, it begins to give you the opportunities for more efficiency for those vehicles, transportation services. So school buses can get to school faster and better. They will get signal prioritization, which they don't currently get, which actually was a bit surprising to me when I started working on all this stuff. Transit buses could get better signal prioritization by signaling to intersections along the way more effectively when they're going to arrive and to be able to get through it. And especially, and it's astounding to me that even emergency vehicles benefit greatly from this kind of signal prioritization. So the communities all around us, I think, could see an immediate benefit. I was talking with Mackenzie earlier, and you may remember when I spoke earlier this year, we did 2 school buses in Fulton County, Georgia, and they found immediately a 10 to 12% fuel economy savings because their buses were able to just cruise through traffic and get to school on time, and less stop and go traffic that they were working with. The other thing that I think is a real big benefit, and we're working with a company called Spoke, is to explore how can we equip the shared bicycle fleets, particularly with their e-bikes, to have this kind of technology in there, and then give the drivers of the cars around them an alert that they're coming a little bit too close to the bicyclist. So again, this all sort of connects into the infrastructure, but it's a way for the local communities to get started. And once this sort of flywheel begins to spin, more and more cars will begin to enter the market. More and more automakers that have been kind of in this wait and see mode to say, okay, let's see what happens when the FCC really does this. We'll begin to see the clear advantage to having this for their owners or even their shared vehicle fleets. Mackenzie, can you go to the next slide? I just want to make sure everybody's clear what we're talking about with Cellular V2X, because it's alphabet soup, which is terrible, but that's kind of what we're sort of left with the federal government. So it's everything from vehicle to bike, V2B there on the left side, to vehicle to infrastructure, vehicle to pedestrian, vehicle to vehicle, of course, and then back from pedestrian to the network or the infrastructure to the network. And this provides this sort of contiguous opportunity to inform the drivers and eventually inform the vehicle's advanced driver assistance systems, that they can begin to take action if the person behind the wheel isn't responding as they should as they come up into a difficult situation in an intersection or a pedestrian, bicycle, school bus, etc. So the first step is to give a CUCB alert to drivers that can be communicated over the network at a longer distance and more dramatically directly when there's a life critical situation about to happen. And so V, of course, is vehicle X, as I said earlier, is everything. And we think there's a huge opportunity to explore these different realms of communication. If you go to the next slide, please. And this is really a way to look at how these are best working together. So if you look on the axis going up, the accident probability and the accident timeline, you see this sort of curve that begins to happen where you can even avoid getting into a dangerous situation there on the left. And if you could keep clicking through that, Mackenzie. I think there's a few slides. That's where you're giving the driver warning when there's a situation that they could avoid. So typically the time to impact is less than 3 seconds. You get a really loud vocal warning. But if it's greater than 10 seconds, that gives people time to prepare and moderate the way that they're driving. And then in the middle there is an unavoidable state where there's going to be an impact. You can still have some opportunity to avoid that or reduce injury through direct communications. But, you know, the laws of physics being what they are, you can't stop entirely. But giving people earlier information through longer range network communications and then direct, immediate, take action now, brake hard messaging can greatly reduce the injury possibilities. And then on the left there in the area D, you have sort of the aftermath, you know, when there's the airbags going off and then the rescue when the collisions actually already happen. So I just show this because it gives you a sense of how these different options under cellular V2X, network communications and then direct communications, really play together to greatly enhance safety. If you go to the next slide. Oh, okay. And also just give you a sense when I talk long range, short range, and if you could kind of click through this to Mackenzie, we can show what that means. So proximity on the very left side, ultra short range, that's RFID, near field communications. Then you've got Bluetooth in the personal area network, ultra wideband, Wi-Fi. And then on the very right-hand side, you've got where the mobile networks provide services. So 5G, 4G, and some other forms of communication. Starlink fits into that. And if you could keep clicking, I think there's a couple more. There is where CV2X, oop, back one, there. That's where CV2X is sort of at the sweet spot where it can provide greater awareness of what's going on the road than you get from some of these other forms of getting information into and out of the car. And so if you look there, it's in the range of a kilometer away, which is quite a bit of opportunity to prepare your driving and your awareness of the environment. You go to the next slide. So this is the big challenge that we face, which is that the value proposition is backloaded, that we need both V and the X to be equipped. And when I said earlier, 284 million cars on the road, and it takes roughly 12 years for the US vehicle fleet to turn over, different lengths of time for heavy trucks and buses and things of that nature to retire. You know, we need to start now as automakers like ours are beginning to take steps to put this into our production vehicles. We need to start now to get the infrastructure built and maybe some quick wins with the public fleets, like I mentioned earlier. You know, pardon me, the when you're dealing with a passenger car, there's a lot of NHTSA regulations that you need to adhere to. You want to make it nice and pretty so people want to buy your car versus a competitor's car. It needs to be integrated with the electronics architecture, which is incredibly complex these days of a passenger vehicle. But when you're talking about the opportunities with the public fleet, you can really effectively retrofit a school bus or a transit bus or any other public fleet vehicle, because really all you need is an onboard unit and some sort of display or tablet that can be put in and used for the driver's benefit. And it's not that expensive, honestly, in the end, to be able to do that. And that's why I think Federal Highways is thinking about ways that they can incentivize local road operators and local fleet operators to think about how this could work in a relatively quick period of time. Mackenzie, if you can go one more. Oh, I think I said that. So how do we unlock the promise of CV2X? As I said, long term, far away, there's sort of a now, near, and far term horizon. These will all happen. I'm very confident. And I'm really confident these will happen because there's an enormous amount of work that's going on in China around these. And as the biggest automotive market in the world, these technologies will be valid in Chinese traffic and they'll be valid in our traffic. So automakers are going to be looking to deploy this in China. And the question is, how do we prepare our roads in the near term? So longer term, as I said, cooperative autonomy, it will happen. It's intent, what one car is intending to do so that another car can give way in a traffic lane for a merge or something of that nature, and cooperative decision making. That's going to happen, and that's really when you're going to start to see some incredible things, particularly around self-driving vehicles that need to be able to understand what each other is doing on the roads. If you could click again, maybe just click a couple more times. So for cooperative autonomy too, you need HD data sharing and mapping, and we're going to need a high degree of CV2X deployment. But go ahead and click through, Mackenzie. So the beachhead of how we get started is what I want to focus on yet, and that's where I'm hoping we can continue to think together about what makes sense for Northern Virginia, both with NVTA and VDOT. As I said, first responders and other public fleets, but particularly first responders, are an obvious choice to be able to have the signal prioritization and the ability to tell other cars when they're equipped with this technology how to get out of the way or how to clear an intersection. Especially when you can think about an ambulance being able to tell a kilometer away that it's going to be going through a certain intersection to the infrastructure, and those signals can then begin to get cars out of the way, reduce congestion, so an ambulance or fire truck can get through. That's a huge opportunity that just doesn't exist very effectively right now. So we should think about doing that. We think, and we've had a number of discussions with toll organizations that are operating here in Northern Virginia. We think there's real opportunities to do a better job in tolling and really kind of take out the middleman of payments for tolling, because CV2X can do a dramatically more efficient job of directly billing the customer as they go through a toll gate. You could even imagine with a roadside unit, you wouldn't even need tolling gantries, the gates that we have at all of our toll booths, which is a huge amount of savings for the tolling. And I think I've seen estimates that of every toll, there's about a 40 cents goes strictly to back office and billing and charging customers and things like that. So again, this is an area where there's a lot of, I don't want to call it waste, but there's stuff that can be made more efficient. And I think the tolling operators are really excited about what that could mean, in addition to how they prepare their roads, like the new I-66 and of course the 95, 495 corridors, how they can become more efficient and have better traffic flow to help there. And then, as I said earlier, two-wheelers are a huge opportunity. If you ask people why they don't use shared bikes or why they don't use their own bikes, it's because they're terrified of traffic. That's a clear reason that this is happening. There, and then from the next step in the near term, hopefully you will have state DOTs and other road operators continue to install more infrastructure. The vehicles will become increasingly connected, and vehicle-to-vehicle solutions will emerge. We'll have some vehicle-to-vehicle communications in our cars from the start, but it won't be as elaborate as you can imagine it being. Truly like a ballet of traffic to avoid collisions. Go to the next one. So this is my last slide, and I'm hoping we can have some good questions and answers. I'm really eager to, not only now, but in the future, talk with folks on the phone or on the Teams call here, and with NVTA. Look, this all boils down to a dramatic human benefit. And if we have to keep this in mind as we're thinking about this and what it really means to the families who have somebody who's no longer at the dinner table. So on the left here is the young family, the Langenkamps. Many of you know this story. They had just returned from Sarah Langenkamp. The mother was in the State Department in Kiev and had just returned to Northern Virginia to work here. Her husband was also working in Kiev as well, and they brought their family home here to actually they're in Maryland, but the fact of the matter is this is happening all over our region. One day she was riding her bike. She loved to bike from her kids' school. She was riding in a unprotected bike lane on River Road in Bethesda. A truck did not see her, turned into her, and killed her. And the outpouring of this tragedy has been significant. I met Dan Langenkamp, her husband, a couple of weeks ago, and you'll never find somebody who's more committed to the opportunity of what technology can do to help prevent tragedies like they suffered. We really have to think in terms of how this is affecting people day in, day out. We're sort of numb to 43,000 people in the country dying every year. And we sort of think about, well, what does it mean if an automated vehicle happens to injure somebody? We don't think in the fact that there's an equivalent of a Boeing 737 falling out of the sky in the United States right now on traffic deaths. And things that what's inspired us at Audi, and me in particular, is we have solutions to this. We can deploy these things and make things more efficient and help out with some equity issues in our communities. But we need to think together about how to do it. And so I welcome the opportunity to talk with any of the folks here in this discussion or with NVTA to think, how do we really unlock this? So with that, McKenna, that's my last slide. I won't torture you with more PowerPoint, but I urge everybody to keep the human factor in mind as we discuss this.
Thank you so much for your expertise and for that really grounding perspective about why this is so important. One of NVTA's core values rather, is safety. And along with equity and sustainability, but this is a really great reminder as to why this is so important. So thank you for everything you've just said. And I would like to take the opportunity to get some questions from the audience. I know we have just a few minutes left. I would like to start with a quick question for the audience. If you all wouldn't mind, I'll put a poll up on the screen, and then we'll move to some questions that we've received in advance and through the chat box. Keep putting your questions in the chat, and we'll get to as many as we can. So here is a question for everyone in attendance today. You can click on the best option for you. As soon as you click, it will disappear on your screen, but don't worry, I'll put the results up as it ends. And I'll just give you about a minute and a half, but what we were looking to find out is, why are you all interested in connectivity and automation? I'll note that there is an other option here, and if you select that, I'd encourage you to put some more information in the chat box as well about what your interests, what this topic means to you. And if you've answered, I see with the option that you're working on a project now that uses these technologies, I'd encourage you to put links or any information you'd like to share in the chat box also. Looks like all of you have answered. Thank you for doing that so quickly. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll because I want to save time for your questions, and I'll share the results. Great. So looking at this, it looks like we have a few folks who are working on a project actively. And again, I'd love to hear more about it. Please put that in the chat. We'll have some information so we follow up with you and learn a bit more. And I see a few folks saying that they need ideas for applications. And I think Brad has given us a few ideas, but maybe he can hit on some more when he's answering your questions. And a couple people would like to understand it better. So we have the full spectrum. I think that's indicative of how technology is coming about in NOVA in general. We have some folks really moving things forward on the cutting edge, and some folks that need the additional information. And that's part of why through our TTSP, we have this education outreach charge bringing you things like the Lunch and Learns today. So looking forward to keeping that conversation going. Without further remarks from me, I'll move to your questions. The most important part here, we received a couple in advance, and I'll start with those and then move to the chat box. Brad, I have a question from Richard Mudge, one of your fellow Transportation Technology Committee members. He asks, does deployment of AVs require public sector support in terms of financial aspects and or regulation?
It doesn't necessarily need it, but we've always taken the approach that we want to be extremely collaborative and transparent with the communities that we want to deploy, particularly mobility as a service fleets, similar to what was operating in Merrifield. And you want to make sure that there's a clear understanding of when there might be an issue, some sort of a collision or something like that. So we want to work very closely with the first responders as well. In terms of regulation, we're kind of stuck at a federal level. Congress has not figured out how it can create a federal AV framework. Part of that is rooted in some fears that the Teamsters are raising, that it's going to eliminate truck driver jobs, even though there's about 80,000 empty truck driver jobs currently. And even though the bulk of the truck driver workforce is aging rapidly. So the fact of the matter is, true driverless delivery or point-to-point long-distance automated delivery type technologies are some years off, but we're not taking steps to prepare for that. And NHTSA as well is working through how does it begin to regulate this new type of vehicle, and that's taken a lot longer for them to think about. How do we regulate a vehicle that has no steering wheel or foot pedals? How do we regulate different seating configurations? So these things are in the works, but they're taking a very long time.
Great, thank you, Brad. And we have another question here for you. I'll try to get one more in. I know we're at 11:45, but Brad, if you're open to staying, I'll get another question or two in with you. And folks, if you have to drop off, I do understand. And thank you for being here with us. We're recording this session. We'll post it to our YouTube page. You'll get a link via email to follow up there. But the next question I got was from, I believe that's Brian Simmons of the MITRE Corp. Are there examples of AV pilots where exploring or developing the business case was the explicit goal? And are those models, are these good models to look into shifting away from the traditional art of the possible focus of the pilots that you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, I would say that if you look at what Waymo's doing in the Phoenix area and what Cruise is doing in the Bay Area, and Waymo's now entering the San Francisco Bay Area, I would say most of those mobility as a service automation innovators are truly looking to scale up. It just doesn't make sense anymore to do, as Brian said, the art of the possible. You have to think about how you're going to collect fares and make a business out of this. So they're continuing to refine what they're doing, but they're definitely, I think, would say, have their sights on going from what they started in those markets and building up from there. And I think that's a consideration that here in Northern Virginia I would urge us all to think about. And well, let me just add one more thing to that. As I mentioned earlier, I think it makes absolute sense for Northern Virginia to work with DC and Maryland, but we need to make sure that the policies that are being put in place aren't creating roadblocks. That's one of the problems that's happened of late in DC, is that they've created some new requirements and regulations that make it really impossible to deploy. So that's one way to approach it. If you don't want it, you can certainly legislate it out. But if you really want to encourage this as an opportunity into the future, we need to think about how to do that in a collaborative way. I mean, we're not trying to force something down the throats of their local communities here, but we need to think about how to really work together to bring this to full fruition.
Brad, thank you. I'll hit one more question because most of these have focused on the policy and the technologies of the AVs themselves, but I see one here that talks about it in a multimodal context, and because NVTA is a multimodal oriented organization, I'd love to get your thoughts on this one as well, and then we'll shut it down. So the question is, you mentioned earlier that AVs will augment traditional mass transit and not replace it. How have traditional transit organizations like APTA been working with you along these lines?
We've had a number of discussions with APTA. I don't know if they've talked to others, but when we've talked to APTA, they're very excited about it. APTA is a member of PAVE, for example. And the reason for that is because they see the clear opportunity to have automated vehicles bring more users to transit versus just opting to drive their own car. So if you can collect more riders to transit, you get more user experience that way. And at least as I haven't talked to them recently, but not too long ago, that was the way that they were looking at things. And talking as well to different transit agencies around the country, they see this as a way to maybe fill in some gaps where some of them are deploying with Uber or Lyft rides or other ways to get people from their homes or work to the actual fixed route transit.
Right, so really filling in that first last mile connectivity.
Yeah, exactly.
It's synergistic. Okay, that is great to hear. And I think we could keep talking to you all day because this is fascinating. Your expertise is so both deep and wide. But I do also want to be respectful of folks' time and say thank you to everyone who has made the time to join us today. We really appreciate you all being here for this discussion. We would like to hear from you about this Lunch and Learn, how you thought it went, and any ideas you might have for the future. So keep an eye out on your inbox. We'll send you a survey via email. We will also be sharing information about our next session. We have one more this summer rather, that will take place on July 20th and focus on best practices for ITS, so a little bit relevant technology there. You will find information about that in your inbox soon, but you can also subscribe to our Driven by InNoVation newsletter that we put out once a month to find more information on how to register, and I will put the URL to sign up in our chat box right now. That is everything we have for today. And I look forward to seeing you all at a future Lunch and Learn. And thank you again, Brad, for your time and your knowledge. I hope you all have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.